9. Bruno Fernandez das Dores de Souza. Brazilian soccer star Bruno Fernandez de Souza was married when he met his mistress Eliza Samudio at a party. Samudio disappeared in 2010 shortly after she began claiming to be pregnant with Bruno's baby. Her child from another man was soon seen in the care of Bruno's wife. At that point, a judge ordered Bruno's arrest, but there were still a lot of questions that needed to be answered before prosecutors could move forward with formal charges. According to the already growing stack of incriminating evidence against Bruno was the fact that his cousin claimed to be a participant in Samudio's murder. He told authorities that Samudio was dead, but wouldn't disclose how she died or the location of her body. Prosecutors accused Bruno of having his young cousin cut up Samudio's body and feeding some of her parts to his dogs while encasing the rest of her body in concrete. He eventually confessed to masterminding the plot. Bruno reportedly tried to take his own life twice while in jail awaiting trial for murder, kidnapping, hiding a body, forming a criminal gang, and corrupting minors. A representative for the star athlete denied the rumors and claimed that Bruno fainted from low blood sugar levels. He was initially sentenced to 22 years in prison, but he appealed the case and was released just 6 years later. Bruno was rearrested a few years later, but returned to prison for just a brief period before being sentenced to house arrest. Since then, he's regained total freedom and has been able to resume his professional soccer career with what his victim supporters feel was a mere slap on the wrist. 8. Alonso Dagan Jr. Adultery can cause someone a world of problems, but in the US it's typically not considered a criminal offense, at least not in the civilian world. In the military, however, it can earn someone a dishonorable discharge, which more or less amounts to a huge smear on their future career prospects. Instead of facing the consequences for their poor decision, some cheating military members seek another solution to their problem. Take 30-year-old Alonso Dagan Jr. for example, who was accused of fatally shooting the mother of his unborn baby in 2021. Dagan was a married active duty staff sergeant at Fort Bragg Army Base in North Carolina. He allegedly got involved in an extramarital affair with his high school classmate, 28-year-old Akayla Ware, who became pregnant with his baby. She was shot dead in Troup County, Georgia, in what authorities initially believed was a road rage incident. Her bullet-riddled car was found on the side of a county highway. Further investigation pointed their suspicions toward Dagan, who faced charges of feticide, murder, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. He was officially indicted in early 2022, and there haven't been any updates on the case since. 7. Timothy Bremer. 41-year-old Claire Parry apparently got sick of being British police officer Timothy Bremer's dirty little secret. Their affair had been going on for 10 years. One day, in 2021, she took Bremer's phone when he wasn't looking and sent his wife a text message saying, "I'm cheating on you." Bremer was so overcome with rage that he strangled Claire to death in a parking lot. During his trial for murder, his defense attorney argued that he killed her by accident, and Bremer admitted to manslaughter but denied committing murder. But the court learned that Claire and another one of Bremer's lovers had co-conspired to expose his affairs and make his life a living hell, making it seem far more likely to some that the victim met with foul play rather than a tragic accident. According to prosecutors, Bremer purposefully stabbed himself with a knife and acted hysterical in the immediate aftermath of the crime to make himself look less culpable. The jury ultimately cleared Bremer of murder and accepted his admission to manslaughter, leaving Parry's surviving loved ones disappointed, to say the least. He was originally sentenced to 10.5 years in jail, but a judge determined that the court went too easy on him the first time and increased his sentence to 13.5 years. 6. Gregory Nelson Jr. 27-year-old Gregory Nelson Jr. was anything but happy when in 2011 he found out that his mistress, 24-year-old Susana Cisneros, was pregnant with his child. The two had met while working together at a Chipotle restaurant in Virginia, and they began to see each other romantically despite Nelson being married. Cisneros was 9 months pregnant when her sister found her stabbed to death behind a dumpster in a parking lot. Someone had killed her using a knife from the restaurant where she and Nelson worked. Authorities were quick to suspect Nelson of being the killer and charged him with capital murder, with plans to prove that he not only intended to kill Cisneros, but to kill her unborn child as well. Suspects are rarely charged with capital murder in Henrico County due to the enormous resources and costs that go into proving the suspect's guilt, but the prosecutors felt strongly enough about the case to move forward with the allegations. Nelson managed to elude authorities twice during their manhunt for him by fleeing to Florida, but the US Marshals caught up to him within days of him going on the run. Upon being captured, he confessed to the crimes. He was convicted of first-degree murder in 2013 and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. 5. Sydney and Tammy Mora. Heather Elvis was just 20 years old when she began seeing her married 37-year-old co-worker Sydney Mora in 2013. Word of the affair spread like wildfire throughout their small South Carolina town, and it wasn't long before Sydney's wife Tammy found out. Tammy allegedly sent Heather a slew of threatening text messages, which spooked Heather enough to try moving on from Sydney, but not enough to cut him out of her life completely. Shortly after her first date with another man one evening, Heather received a call from a payphone that lasted a few minutes. She also spoke over the phone with Sydney a few times. A little while later, during the early morning hours, she drove to Peachtree Landing boat launch. Her last known whereabouts were traced through cell phone records. Heather's car was found at the landing with no sign of her nearby and no physical evidence of foul play. Prosecutors argued, based on circumstantial evidence, that Sydney and Tammy orchestrated Heather's disappearance. They accused Sydney of baiting the young woman to the boat launch, where Tammy allegedly lied in wait until Heather arrived. According to the prosecution, the couple then killed Heather and disposed of her body, which was never found. They accused Tammy of being the mastermind behind the crime, claiming that she found out Heather might be pregnant with Sydney's baby and pressured her husband to go along with the plan. Sydney's trial for kidnapping ended in a mistrial. Tammy was found guilty of kidnapping and was sentenced to 30 years in prison. She maintains her innocence in the case, insisting she had nothing to do with Heather's disappearance, despite her vile online posts about Heather even after the young woman vanished. Sadly, Heather's disappearance will continue to be shrouded in mystery until her body is found. 4. Christopher Lee. 19-year-old Erin Corwin was married to a decorated Marine when she got pregnant in 2014, but the baby didn't belong to her husband, John Corwin. Erin was pregnant by her secret lover, who was also a married military man and her husband's friend, Christopher Lee. By then, she and John Corwin had begun to drift apart amid frequent disagreements about money and other things, and instead of working to fix things, Erin began to cheat. At the same time, Lee and his wife, Nicole, were having their own issues, leaving the future of their marriage uncertain at best. After becoming pregnant, Erin hoped that Lee would propose to her and that they would go on to live happily ever after together, but that never happened. Instead, Erin disappeared after leaving her apartment one morning to go on an outing with Lee in the vast California desert. In the meantime, Lee suddenly moved to Alaska, taking his wife and children with him. Erin's family initially believed that she'd gotten lost in Joshua Tree National Park, but they began to suspect that she met with foul play when they found her car abandoned. Soon after that, the young woman's lifeless body was found at the bottom of a mine shaft. She had been strangled to death with a homemade ligature. By then, it was impossible to tell whether she was pregnant. And being far away wasn't enough for Christopher Lee to evade accountability for his suspected role in Erin's death. He was arrested in Alaska and was extradited back to California on a murder charge. Lee initially pleaded not guilty to the crime, but eventually confessed to killing his teenage lover. He claimed that he committed the murder because Erin was harming his daughter, but the court didn't buy the story. Lee was convicted of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. His attempt to appeal the case was denied, leaving him with no choice but to spend the rest of his days behind bars. 3. Chauncey Jones. Chauncey Jones had been an officer with the Memphis Police Department in Tennessee for 3 years when he met and began seeing his mistress, Phyllis Malone, in 2008. Just weeks later, Malone told Jones that she was pregnant with his baby. She also allegedly threatened to tell Jones's wife about the affair. One evening, Jones persuaded Malone to meet up with him at a gas station. He tried talking her into getting an abortion, which Malone was adamantly opposed to doing, and a heated argument erupted between the pair. Not wanting to listen to her illicit lover's repeated pleas to end the pregnancy, Malone said bye Chauncey and turned to leave. Instead of letting her go, Jones shot her 3 times execution style. She died at the scene. Malone was found dead in the driver's seat of her car the next morning, while Jones reported to work as usual, as if nothing had happened. But it wasn't long before investigators interrupted his day to question him about the homicide. Jones eventually admitted to killing Malone and was charged with second-degree murder. As her autopsy would ultimately reveal, Malone wasn't pregnant after all. The court convicted Malone of the charge, and he was sentenced to 24 years in prison without parole, radically changing his world from one where he was an upkeeper of the law to one where he was on the opposite side of the bars. 2. Richmond Phillips. While working as a police officer in Washington, D.C., Richmond Phillips decided to try living a double life. As a result, he got his mistress, 20-year-old Winetta Wright, pregnant. Phillips managed to keep his lover and child a secret from his wife for a certain length of time, but his side fling became a threat to his marriage when Wright filed a paternity lawsuit against Phillips in 2011. Phillips didn't want to pay child support, so instead he shot Wright to death at a public park in Prince George's County, Maryland, and then left their 11-month-old child to perish in the backseat of a hot car. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, but maintained his innocence throughout his case. In court, Phillips' defense attorney said that there wasn't enough evidence against his client for a conviction, and that Phillips didn't do this thing. On the other hand, prosecutors depicted the 39-year-old as a habitual liar and cheater who would do anything to hide his secret life from his wife, even if it meant killing. The court found the defendant guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. Phillips was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 20 years without parole in the disturbing case. The victim's mother, Wivette Wright, told the press that she had hoped for the death penalty, but that she was nevertheless thankful for the outcome of the case. She described Phillips as the devil himself and a true monster, and said that she didn't believe he had any remorse whatsoever for the heartless and senseless act of violence he committed against her daughter and grandchild. 1. Rosario DeGiralamo. In 2007, a 36-year-old New Jersey man named Rosario DeGiralamo began to feel pressured by his 27-year-old mistress, Amy Giordano, when he was already financially strapped to begin with. Giordano was the mother of DeGiralamo's young son, and she wanted a new apartment, but DeGiralamo apparently wasn't in a position to dish out even more dough for a nicer place, leaving Giordano angry enough to threaten to tell his wife about the affair. The disagreement between the clandestine couple erupted into a huge argument, and DeGiralamo flew into a rage. He hit Giordano in the head repeatedly with a hammer until she lost consciousness. DeGiralamo later claimed that by the time he came to his senses and began to administer emergency first aid, it was far too late to save her life. The court saw things differently, especially after learning that the killer had Googled terms like martial arts and lethal blows to the head in the days leading up to the murder. After killing the victim, DeGiralamo cut her body up, stuffed the parts into suitcases, and dumped them in various places with the help of a friend. One suitcase was recovered from a pond in New York State, while the rest remain missing to this day. Superior Court Judge Edward Neefsey accused DeGiralamo of carefully plotting Giordano's death ahead of time and of aiming to eradicate and eliminate the victim from his life. He also rejected the defendant's argument that he caved to financial and social pressures, stating that DeGiralamo actively chose to maintain 2 separate households. DeGiralamo was convicted of murder and received a 25-year sentence. Thanks for watching. If your best friend was having an affair and their partner became suspicious, would you cover for them, stay out of it, or tell their spouse the truth? Let us know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.